You're listening to episode 86, Realizing That the Abuse Isn't All That You Are, with Emily Stroia. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode. Thank you for tuning in. It's always great to have you here. Whether you are a new listener or a regular listener, I always appreciate having you tune in. And this week, I'm going to be joined by survivor Emily Stroia. And Emily is a survivor of different types of child abuse. And so I know that this episode is going to be relevant to you regardless of what your background is. And so I'm excited to get into this one today. But before we do, I just want to mention that today's episode is brought to you by audible.com. Audible is the premier provider of digital audiobooks. I signed up with them to get you a free audiobook download along with a 30-day free trial. They have over 180,000 titles, including some that have been mentioned on this show in the past, that you can choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or whatever you use as an MP3 player. So if this is something that interests you and you want to check it out, all you have to do is go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/audible, and you'll be able to go ahead and get your free audio download along with that 30-day free trial. So Emily's going to share with us today about how she was born into an abusive household and how she was mentally, emotionally, physically, and sexually abused over her time growing up in this household. And I do want to issue a trigger warning, especially if you are a sexual abuse survivor. I think that what we talk about has the potential to be triggering, so I do just want to mention that. And some of the things that we're going to be talking about today include boundaries, dealing with trust issues, belief systems. That one keeps coming up, doesn't it? Must be important. Emily's going to share about how her story has become a gift that has been able to transform her life and the lives of others. We're going to talk about building healthy relationships, and we're going to talk a little bit about intuition as well, and why it's something that as a survivor we can lose touch with, and what we can do to kind of get back in touch with our intuition. And if you listened to the previous episode with Jacob Nordby, you might recall that we talked about this during that episode as well, and how important it was for Jacob to trust his intuition and to listen to his inner voice, and how that is important for all of us. And so we'll be talking about that a little bit here again as well. And before we get into it, I want to do something a little different, or something I haven't done in a while, and that is to read a review that I got on iTunes recently. And so if you'll bear with me for a moment, I'd like to share this. And this is from Ashley Suzanne, and she's titled it Helpful for Emotional Abuse Survivors Too. And she says, "This podcast is like stumbling onto a gold mine. Every episode has helped me see myself more clearly. I need to start taking notes because the content is so rich. Thank you, Melissa, for sharing this with us." Well, thank you, Ashley Suzanne, for your review. I really appreciate it. And, you know, it's getting feedback like this that really encourages me and really motivates me to continue doing what I'm doing, and just to know that it's making a difference. So thank you for sharing that with me. And I've been getting a lot of feedback lately, and thank you to all of you who have been getting in touch with me in one way or another, just to let me know about how the show is helping you, or ideas for future guests, or future topics that could help you. So really just thank you for that. Thank you for reaching out, and please continue to do it. I really do appreciate getting that feedback. All right. And so without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into this episode, and I'm going to bring Emily on. Emily, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here to share your story with us.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be on with you and to share my story.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here as well. So I found out about you by coming across an article you wrote for Tiny Buddha called The Transformative Powers of Pain, Healing from Abuse. And after reading through that article, I knew that you were someone I wanted to have on the show and have share your story with us. You talk about how you are a survivor of multiple forms of abuse, including mental, emotional, physical, and sexual. And you talk about how you've been able to overcome the abuse and use your experience as a guide and as a teacher rather than allow it to consume you. So I'm definitely looking forward to having you share your story and journey with us today. And what I like to do here, Emily, is basically start at the beginning so that we have that context of where you're coming from. We'll then get into how you were affected and how you've been able to get to where you are today and all of that. So how does that sound to you?
Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah, so just kind of, give us the summary of the abuse and how old you were when it began and just whatever you'd like us to know about it.
Yeah, sure. So I believe that the abuse was always really there, even before I was conceived. I believe my parents had already started to create this abusive relationship with each other. And I remember stories from my mom that my dad had been abusive to her even before my brother and I were born. When I was born, I remember vague memories of like physical abuse from my father towards my mom and sometimes towards me growing up. And he was just very like emotionally abusive in the sense of not really wanting a girl. Like he always was more fond of the idea of having a son. And as I got older, the abuse sort of progressed. It became more mental and somewhat physical. And he sort of turned to me later in my teen years as my mother progressed in her depression. She's diagnosed with schizophrenia and depression, and she worsened a lot in her condition, and she really started to retreat and didn't really talk to us, and she wasn't very engaged in the home for quite some years. So when I hit my teen years, my dad started projecting his feelings from my mom towards me, and our relationship shifted a lot, and he was starting to see me more as a woman rather than his daughter. So it was quite an experience to be able to not only have witnessed that this physical form of abuse as a young little girl, and then having a mother who is also severely mentally ill, then to be a teenager and have your dad be so attracted to you. So
Yeah, that sounds, just like a difficult situation. And what I guess sounds like, makes it really difficult is that you were kind of born into this situation where it was abusive right from the get-go, and you didn't really have any time where it wasn't that way. So I can imagine how difficult that must have been, and then for it to just continue and kind of escalate and evolve as you got older as well.
yeah, my brother, he was 6 years younger than me, and I don't, he didn't. I don't feel like. I mean, I can't speak for him, but I wouldn't say that he had. He didn't experience sexual abuse in the way that I did. It was just quite a journey to be, 16 years old and fearful of your dad. There were times when he would like sneak into my room at night and pretend that he was checking on something, and I would just wake up and he would be there, like sleeping next to me in his boxers, or telling me that he was in love with me, or that he was sexually attracted to me. And that was around 13 or 14 when it really started. That part of it was I think the most painful part for me is that line that was really crossed. I mean, all of the lines were crossed, but that one was like the ultimate biggest no, right? is to
Right.
have your parent just go from this mental and emotional and physical level to now there's a sexual attraction involved.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Were you able to talk to anyone about it this time?
no, when I started getting really rebellious when I was 13 years old, really big time. I was running away from home a lot and just really acting out because of my circumstances at home and my dad's attraction towards me. I think I was in denial for a while. Like it was something I kind of hid to myself and I didn't tell anybody for years. Um, and then one day there was this really big escalated argument in which the police had came and they had arrested my parents because it was so bad. And it took about a year, but after that, I was emancipated and I lived with my friend's family until I moved, until I joined the military. So it was only until after I had been emancipated that I started talking a little bit about my dad being sexually attracted to me and just about the abuse in general. But I had started going to therapy and started processing it. But at the time, it was something that was so overwhelming in my head that I almost felt like it was my fault. Like if I had it been a certain way, or maybe I had provoked him in some way, or if I had just been the perfect daughter, maybe he would have loved me more as a daughter than as this, object of affection for him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it must have been difficult, like knowing that, he was more interested in having a son than having a daughter. Like, did you always know that,
Hmm.
like from very early on?
Yeah. Since I was
Mm-hmm.
very young, I remember like when my brother was born, it was about 2 years old. He was two, and I think I was 8. And I remember just a memory of something that happened with us and him just being so concerned for my brother's well-being, but not of my own.
Mm-hmm.
And it really changed my view of him after that for years. And I had that realization that I wasn't lovable enough for him.
Mm-hmm.
Not personally, but he has, to me, I mean, now looking at it from this perspective, I can see that he has some sort of hang-ups with women because it just, for you to dislike your own daughter and to make her feel a certain way. And then later on, he was very strange with family members getting close to me or my cousin being too close to me, like any other man being close to me.
I'm curious, like, how did this kind of affect your relationship with your brother as you were growing up?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. We didn't have a good relationship.
No.
No, I resented him.
Mm.
We had some moments where we were good. But again, we were like 6 years apart. So I was completely like at a different age stage than he was. And he just sort of would tell on me if he saw me doing something that was not what I was supposed to be doing, being the rebellious teen that I was. Um, and I just hated him for it. I was like, oh my gosh, like you just keep getting me in trouble. Um, but
Mm.
yeah, my brother and I, we don't speak. He basically kind of cut himself off from all of us except for my parents. Like he doesn't talk to me or my cousins or really anyone in our family anymore. And that was a decision he made like a couple of years ago. Nobody really understood why, but he's doing okay, I guess. But yeah, our relationship wasn't ever really the best, and especially after I moved out, I was emancipated. It just kind of was even more estranged, and he ended up like resenting me for that later and blaming me for leaving him. And that was some guilt that I did carry around for many years. But I've forgiven myself, and I know that it wasn't my fault. So yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Well, that's too bad that it impacted your relationship that way. Um, and now, what about like the situation with your mother?
Mm.
It must have been difficult for you to not really have any support from her, and for her to be kind of checked out and struggling as she was with her own issues.
Um, yes, I sort of had to learn. how to parent myself at a young age, and sort of grew up really quickly and had some profound realizations that my parents weren't going to be the parents that I needed them to be. And at times, like, I was angry at her, but I also understood how her illness impacted her sense of, protecting me or being there for me. And we talk sometimes now, but at that point, yeah, I was pretty angry with her, and just her not being there for me in the way that a mother should be there for their child. And she tried a little bit to protect me from my dad, but I think she was just also totally unable to protect herself from him. So, I mean, how much could she have done for me?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. And it sounds like the abuse ended when you, or I guess when you had them arrested that one time, and then you ended up moving out after that and getting emancipated. Is that when it all kind of came to an end?
yeah, I would say that was probably the cherry on top was that moment. That was when things really shifted, and they signed custody to another family, and I lived with them for a couple of years until I joined the Navy and lived in California. So I was away for quite some time, and I didn't even really keep in touch with them much after I moved out. So it was something I had to do for me. It was to just keep a lot of distance, because in the healing process, like, being around that person or that trigger, it disrupts it a lot, like, a lot. And
Yeah, to still be in that situation.
yeah, and
That's
it's hard for you to shift your perspective, because you hope that they'll be different. Like, for me, I was always hoping that maybe in a year or 2 years they'll realize, how they were as parents, and maybe they'll change, or things will just be better. Like, every child wants that parent to be that way. They want that
right.
great, beautiful relationship. Now I've come to the point in my life where I've accepted that this is the way it has to be. And so it's helped me a lot in my grieving process, but it was a lot of that kind of going back and forth in my head, and that dilemma of how open to leave the relationship. So,
Mm-hmm. So I know you said that you talked to your mom a little bit. Do you have any kind of interaction with your dad today?
no, not really. No. Um, he's reached out to me a few times and sent me some letters, but not much has really changed on his part. And for me, I don't really feel that need to have that relationship to him. So I'm okay with our relationship being the way that it is. I've tried to have a relationship with him, but it always ends up being very unhealthy, or he says something that's very inappropriate or abusive, and so I've had to learn how to place boundaries, and even regardless of the fact that he is my dad, I have to put boundaries because it's not healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, that can be like one of the best things that we can do, but also one of the most difficult things, I think. Because,
Yes.
like you said, you want to have that relationship. You want things to be, the way that they were supposed to be. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And then the best thing that you can do is to have that distance and to have those boundaries in place to protect yourself so that you can, start to move on and start to heal.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, and it's hard when you even start building intimate relationships with people, because the boundaries thing is always going to come up. Like, exercising enough boundaries with someone that you're involved with romantically, especially with an abusive history. It's hard sometimes, but it's something I've been learning constantly, is that lesson with boundaries and saying no and being okay with that. You know, not
Yeah, I
not
think it's
fearing
it's
it.
kind of yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, just saying not fearing it. I think sometimes we are afraid of what will happen if we put that boundary there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something you have to like continually practice.
Yeah,
It's not like, okay, I set up a boundary and I'm done.
right.
You have to keep keep working at it and keep um, you know sticking to it and making sure that you don't let people cross those lines that they're not supposed to.
Yeah, it's like an exercise you have to do all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you kind of, moved on from this situation and moved out on your own and started doing your own thing, what were things like for you? Like right early on, I guess, as you were kind of becoming your own person, what sorts of things were you struggling with at that point?
Trusting people. Yeah. I had a lot of fears around trust and feeling emotionally safe with men. That was something that I had a hard time with, thinking that I needed to be like the object of affection for a man to love me. That impacted my relationships big time. Also, just feeling like I could be loved. Like I had this belief in me that I'm not lovable, that there's something wrong with me, that I'm sort of damaged goods. Those beliefs are shifting quite a lot in me now. I'm realizing and seeing how deserving I am of love, and it's something I think that you know somewhere inside of you, but you don't really see it within yourself, especially after so much trauma. So as I was just building my own life and developing my own sense of self and identity, these things would come up a lot in dating and personal relationships and just friendships. Like I was very fearful of being too close to someone or letting someone be too close to me. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a tough one.
yeah.
Yeah, it's something I struggled with a lot too. How did you get past that or start to learn to trust people again?
Starting to work with that trauma that created created that view that the world was not safe. So everyone is the same. Like everyone's going to be the same. That was sort of my belief system. That,
Hmm.
if this person could do it to me, then sure enough, somebody else will. Because that person is supposed to be the person you love and you trust, and they're supposed to protect you and nurture you and support you. And so, if my own family could do something like that to me, then most definitely a stranger will.
Right.
And so it took some therapy. Like I started working very heavily with therapy after I got out of the military, and after I had a kind of a couple of unhealthy relationships in my early 20s, I decided I was going to really commit myself to a therapy program that was focused a lot on trauma and abuse and building healthy relationships, building healthier ways to communicate. And so that helped me and still helps me a lot with just reinforcing that mentality, reinforcing those beliefs, because it's so easy to get stuck in that kind of old belief system. Like it's easy to go back to it.
Hmm.
So, and those triggers come up sometimes, like something someone says, or maybe the way that that person looks at you sometimes can bring that trigger in your mind.
Yeah, so it sounds like, just being able to see that there's some lies there that you're believing because of the abuse,
Yeah.
and one of them being that everybody is unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, I used to like be out in public and I'd always be looking around me and thinking like, who's gonna do what? Like everybody's got the potential to like harm me, and it was just terrible to be that way.
Yeah. It's
So
scary.
yeah, so yeah, to be able to work on that and get to a point where you don't feel that way anymore is a very freeing thing.
Yeah. I mean, now, like, I'm nowhere nearly as terrified as I used to be of the world. Like now I travel by myself and I'll go and explore alone, or, be able to just talk to someone in a social setting was hard for me. Now I
mhm.
can, have a conversation and not be so anxious or nervous or wondering what are they going to want from me. Like, are there hidden intentions there? Can I trust this person? And just kind of relax and ease into the conversation without all these other thoughts that, bombard me. Um, so
Right, because when we are not trusting anyone, then we're kind of, it's only hurting us. I mean, we're losing out on potential relationships with people.
Right.
We're not giving them a chance. So, yeah, it's good to be able to get to a place where you can at least start giving people a chance. And then, of course, I mean, everybody's going to be a little bit guarded at first and be protective of yourself. But then I think you get to a point where you've learned some skills and you are able to protect yourself even if someone does try to harm you,
Right. Yeah, that's the boundaries again, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, even if someone says something or does something that I feel like was inappropriate or disrespectful or upset me, at least now I can express that and just say, you know what, I didn't appreciate that, and put a boundary there. But before, sometimes I would be like very avoidant or just get triggered and not process what I'm feeling.
And again, that takes practice.
Yeah,
It takes time.
right? It's all like literally like a whole new way of living. Like you really have to sort of reprogram these parts of you that are sort of been subconsciously programmed as a way to survive. Like they were all just coping mechanisms out of survival.
Exactly. And then we have to realize that, we don't need all of these,
Yes.
defense mechanisms.
Yeah.
It's okay to let some of them go.
Exactly. It's the part that's so interesting. It's like once you start seeing that, you're like, wow, yeah, I don't think I need this one anymore.
Yeah. So what other things have you done to kind of help yourself get to where you are today?
Well, in my experience with the abuse, one of the greatest things, I mean, I always feel like my story became one of my greatest gifts in my entire life. It is the biggest part of me, but it's also this part of me that I've used in such a way to transform not just my life, but use it to help other people. And so things that I've done to really help myself while I'm, still healing and moving in a different state with my grief and trauma is just really develop my own intuition, develop my own sense of spirituality, exercising and doing self-care practices like that where they're healthy and they're not these negative outlets, and really trying to surround myself with people that really love me and support me have also helped, catapult me to where I am today. It's just sort of trusting those select group of people who I feel very loved by and supported by have also really encouraged my development.
That's great. Yeah, as we've talked about on this show in the past, it's so important to be around people who are going to support you.
Yes.
And I think that in combination with having those boundaries in place for those people who are not so supportive of you really makes a big difference.
Yeah, it helps me just remember that there are good people in the world and not everyone is going to harm you, and that maybe I had a terrible childhood, but it doesn't mean that the rest of my life has to be that way. I don't have to use it in this negative way where it becomes a thorn in my side, and I'm able to sort of use it and bring more passion to my existence here.
That's great. How would you say that you're doing today overall?
Today in my life now, I would say that I'm doing pretty well considering the amount of trauma that I've endured, not just with my parents, but some of my relationships are not the most healthiest, and sometimes that happens with people who suffer from abuse. They end up sort of replicating those relationships later in their life. And so for me, the last few years have been really about building a new schema of what healthy love looks like, and what a healthy relationship looks like. And I'm thriving in my work, like as a spiritual teacher and an intuitive. In my trauma, I've been able to discover my own gifts in life, and that is to really help someone on a spiritual level and help them find their own intuition so that they can live more of a soul-aligned life and really hone in on their gifts beyond pain or adversity or tragedy or loss. And that's something that I've been able to do really, really successfully. now.
That's great. When did you start doing that?
I've always, to me, I feel like everybody has an intuition. I feel like we all have that sort of gut feeling in our core that we listen to or we choose not to. But I've always felt really intuitive growing up, and I think that trauma maybe enhanced that gift in a way, because your intuition is sort of like your teacher, especially if you're feeling not safe. And I didn't feel safe a lot growing up, so it was something that sort of would tell me, today might not be a good day with your dad, or something better is about to come. And then I would meet like a teacher who helped me in high school get through the transition of being emancipated, something like that. So I would say my intuition's always been with me since I was very young. I only realized it more so after I got out of the military, that I had this deeper curiosity to find some type of peace and to sort of develop myself more in a spiritual sense. And so I started taking classes in intuitive development or psychic development, whatever you want to call it, and then discovering that I had this whole gift inside of me. And so I've been able to help a lot of clients not just heal, but transform their pain and their losses into positives and live more fulfilling lives, and also just teach this work to students. It's been amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that, like, I feel like I've always been able to trust my intuition. Like, it's just something that, like, even when I couldn't trust anything, like, that's the one thing that I was able to trust. I've always just felt like I could trust, my feelings in that regard. But I know some people who've come from abusive backgrounds, like, they're not able to trust their intuition.
Yeah.
Like they just kind of, they lose all of that, and they're not sure of what they can trust, or, and so I think it's really interesting, just to hear about that. I mean, do you have any thoughts on why it might be more difficult for some people?
Yeah, because I personally feel like it's because we do live in this state of fear so much, like that all of the sort of aftermath of that experience stays in the body and it stays in our minds, and I feel like it can paralyze us to a point where you're not able to hear your intuition anymore. You're not able to listen to yourself anymore, because all you're thinking about is you're operating from that fear of what happened and what it potentially can happen again. And so for me, like, I didn't always, like, I knew that I had this inner awareness, but sometimes, it's not always going to be as strong, or you're not going to always be as aware. But I noticed that as I developed and started really focusing on healing from my trauma with therapy and journaling and just writing in general, like, that became a healthier outlet for me to sort of pull some of that out of me, and develop a sense of my inner voice. Yeah. But for years, like, I struggled a lot. Like, I would have, nightmares almost every night after I moved out. And it was terrifying, especially if I was in a relationship. Like, sometimes just sleeping next to someone would trigger that fear of my dad coming into my room again. And I would, wake up screaming, like, get away from me. And it wasn't like, clearly that wasn't happening, but it was just that trigger was coming in. So I think for a lot of us, like, we have that fear inside of us, and it is very strong, and it does, cloud our inner voice and our intuition and our feelings, because also for you to listen to that would mean that you have to be vulnerable, and that's also hard, is being vulnerable.
Yeah, so I guess maybe it's one of those things that you can get better at, kind of as you're working on healing and all these other issues, and you're able to start, like, just, start being able to tune in to you and what your feelings are, what's going on inside of you, once you start, kind of shutting out all this other noise. Yeah,
I would agree with that. I mean, that's something I have really realized, is that healing is not this straight line. Like, it's a process, and we're not going to be able to just be, 100% okay by tomorrow. And there's not going to be a pill that's going to, like, take away those experiences or those memories or those feelings. And we do have to work through them, and we have to just let it kind of not fester. But I think it's just hard to be able to face that. It's hard, for me, it was hard for me to just talk about it for so many years. So it takes a lot of
Yeah.
time. And I've met other people who have been, victims of abuse or sexually abused, and it clouds their vision a lot for years. And there was a woman that I knew, she didn't talk about being sexually abused by her dad until she was in her mid-30s. So to live with that secret for so long is hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, are there things that you still struggle with today?
For me now, it's more about it being emotionally vulnerable, like being open and feeling safe and expressing my feelings if I'm in a relationship with someone. Like, that's the part that I get stuck with sometimes, is just being able to vocalize that and feeling safe and feeling okay with doing that. Because growing up, it was just kind of like, you just don't show that. You don't show those feelings. You don't express yourself in a healthy way, and no one's going to appreciate it. No one's going to care, and so you kind of, like, for me, I felt stupid. That's something that, I struggle with at times, but I feel like I've made so much progress since I've started realizing it.
That's what it's all about, just making that progress.
Yes, big time. I think it's always going to be you're always going to be discovering some new layer. I feel like with this work,
Yeah.
you're always discovering something new, and maybe the first few layers are going to be really painful, and then it kind of smooths out a little bit, and it starts to get a little bit better over time, and then you develop a relationship to it rather than like avoiding it or pushing it away.
So I know that we've talked a little bit about what you do today. Is there anything else that you want to kind of add to that? Anything else that you've going on that you want to mention?
Well, I mainly work with clients like one-on-one, and then we also have a school that I launched. So we're doing our third launch this year, and it's really exciting to be able to have like a set of students that enroll, and it's really taking off, and it's growing. And so there are courses online that people can purchase, and there's intuitive development courses, there's spiritual development courses, and that's just been such a rewarding experience to be able to help someone see their own intuitive side and understand it, especially when they're very like in that analytical state, or in this, some of my students have been, victims of trauma as well. And so they are able to start to see when it's their intuition talking, and it's not just something that it's in their heads or that was from the past type of thing.
Do you have that like on your website? Is that where people could find out more if they're interested in checking that out?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, my website's emilystroia.com. But on there at the top, it says like, check out Emily's school. And so there's like other opt-ins for like free meditation or free mini course, things like that. But yeah, it's all on my website.
Great. I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today.
Yes.
And that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
If I could go back and give myself one piece of advice, probably tell myself that this isn't who you are. It's just a part of you. And you are most absolutely worthy of love and deserving of it. And I'd probably give myself one of the biggest, most amazing hugs ever.
I love it. Yeah, that's great advice. So many times we think that, this is who we are.
Yeah.
Don't realize that it doesn't have to be that way. It can be just a part of us and not be our entire being.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was that way for a long time. Like, this was just who I am. This is just who I am. And looking at it now, I'm like, no, it's just a part of me. And I can take it and use it in a way that helps me. And knowing that I am deserving of unconditional love, and I am worthy of that, and showing myself that is so important.
Absolutely. I will have your website linked up on the show notes page.
Okay.
Any other ways that people can connect with you or find out more about what you have going on?
Yeah. My school site is intuitivesoulschool.com. And then I also have like a Facebook group where people come and they connect with other people. It's really wonderful. And that's facebook.com groups/the intuitive soul. And that's like a really wonderful place for people to just sort of share in their gifts and their development. And we even talk a little bit about some of our personal experiences that have happened. And it's a very supportive, very sacred, spiritual community, and also very uplifting, positive.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'll have all that linked up. And Emily, I just want to thank you for joining me here today and for sharing your story with us. And I love how you've been able to, take what's happened to you and use it for good, and to show us that what happens to us doesn't have to be who we are, and it can become something that's just a part of us and doesn't have to hold us back. So Thank you for that, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Melissa. It's been such an honor to be on here with you, and I just want to express my gratitude to you for having me on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. All right. Well, I hope that you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 86. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Emily S. to find the links mentioned during this episode, or to leave a comment. So one of the things I really hope you're able to take away from this week's episode is that no matter what you've been through in your past, whether you've been bullied, physically abused, emotionally abused, sexually abused, all of the above, whatever you've been through, while yes, it is a part of your story, it's a part of who you are, I hope that you realize that it doesn't have to be all that you are. We can be so much more than the pain of our past. And instead of our past holding us back, we can use it as something to empower us. And that's kind of like what we were talking about in last week's episode with Jacob Nordby, where he was talking about how he was able to change the way that he looks at his past experience so that he was able to take his power back from it, rather than letting it have power over him. And so I just want you to know that that is possible, and I hope that you have hope for that for yourself, and that this episode has helped you in that way. And come back next week. I'm going to be joined by bullying survivor Tensie Taylor, and Tensie's going to share with us about how she's been able to overcome having been bullied throughout her entire time in school. And it's a really inspiring story. She's 28 years old, and she's been able to accomplish so many things in the past 10 years. And I think that whatever your experience is, whether you were bullied or not, you're going to find her story inspiring as well. So I hope that you'll join me for that. And if you're interested in that deal from Audible that I mentioned at the beginning, you can find that over at thegrassgetsgreener.com/Audible, where you can get a free audiobook download along with a 30-day free trial. And don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And as always, have hope.